You do not want to go to China.
And I do not like Maotai.
You do not like what?
Maotai.
Yeah.
You ever had Maotai? No. It's horrendous. It's like mezcal. I mean, I don't like mezcal, but it's good. And it's very strong.
After the first two.
Yes.
After the first two, yeah.
It's the question of what the morning is like. I think it's right.
Yeah. It was weird. They were trying. I've noticed that there are a couple of things about people have a harder drive with things like similar things. They don't want to give up toothpaste, and they don't want to give up because with the group, if you had 8 people, you could do which differs depending on where you are.
Usually there's a lot of joke, which is last night's price, and then there is.
Well, depending on where you are.
That's true.
If you were in Manchuria, you would not.
No, that would be something different. We weren't.
If you were in Beijing, you would but then in Guangzhou, definitely. Not like China. But they had bread, and they had this kind of strange Australian butter roll.
We had an all tea meal, everything tea flavored, including tea ice. I guess my favorite trip was the company OAT, Overseas Adventure Travel, highly recommended. Really the same kind of thing as those college. You get to go to the local school. The provisions are, the accommodations are very Western. You see these thatched huts with full U.S. pipe plumbing and everything. So, but it was to see the ground. It's amazing how many well, maybe not how many exposures. But the first thing is they take you around in these open converted Land Rovers, so you can get 6 or 7 feet very and very first day going out and this elephant, 2 elephants and a cat walk across the path.
Looking right past you, I'm sorry. You're on your phone?
Birds and
Oh, really? At the
39.
Yeah, you have to go to the coffee shop.
Including someone Bill. It was pretty interesting. The adults had fed. They killed a zebra. The adults had fed, and the cubs were now in there feeding. But just outside the ring of lions were the hyenas. And hyenas waiting for a chance to get a jaws really powerful. And so they crush bones and eat bones. And then past them, were quite as strong. The jackals. The jackals are very fast. Sit down, get a piece of meat. The guy told us that the next day, oh, well, totally just 2 hours ago. We went past it. Hey, this speck is gone. See, nature's hardly things these days. Yeah, that was the hippos are in the river feeding during the day, and they come out at night and wander around, and you hear them outside your cabin, and you put smoking around. And the next morning, there were 3 or 4 coconut trees growing over, non-native, somebody second camp, and the elephant had decided, hey, these coconuts are really great. And you shake the tree, and the coconuts will fall down. But he looked at us. We're just getting into jeeps. He said, these guys are threatening my territory. So we took off and charged the last lane over and cut it in. So you've got to be careful. It's wild animals. We can't get out of the jeeps. And one day I said, my legs were so rough, so I just hung it over the edge. God said, no, you can't do that. It's lions. I historic Bay Point and ride, you know, 10, 15 miles.
Big capital corridor.
Yep. This does make a lot more sense, and what hopefully change the December meeting. How's that? This time I brought my bike. Usually I lock it up and also real foggy at my station. Sure. And right, maybe we'll ride around downtown. Of course, they didn't decay when I probably got out.
Yes. But it's not supposed to rain but a lot.
Oh, okay. All right.
Not the coffee type.
Oh, Al, if you're a bike rider and you can't stand riding in the rain.
I hadn't actually
Joanna,
seen
you
you
remember.
for riding
You're-
fast.
Remember the
CBPAC.
you're number 6. So we need one more.
Oh, is that what's happening? Usually they also have a quorum.
They're a little more lousy.
I know this is.
You know what, there was no traffic.
You have to
I
worry
looked
about
outside, I didn't go down to Woodcock today,
your
that's
socks.
straight from my house. And I looked out my window and I didn't see any traffic. I mean, there was cars, but no backup on 80.
But
It's really strange. Sometimes upstream and there's a problem and there's.
Yeah.
But
No.
it was like.
Where you're like, is it Sunday? When I have to leave?
Yep.
I have been a little bit confused.
Has decided, okay, restrictions are off, everything's cool.
But I was thinking, was it a holiday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got a lot of
And it had to be
lobbying
very
out
random.
there.
Yeah, you're right. There could be accidents by the
Last week, I think it was, there was something up at the fairfield, so.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember that.
You take Martin.
But I was in a meeting that morning with people from Solano and the Transportation Authority, and they were stuck.
Robert's in charge now? Oh, Robert.
Are you Jamar today?
You're the new TransPAC person. One day. Did they hire someone to be a TransPAC PD?
The meeting is soon.
As in the
I think
TransPAC?
it's Thursday.
No, if you want to apply.
No, okay.
No, I don't.
I always shy away from direct contact.
Jeremy, do they still have a open
I
position?
will find out on Thursday. We're interviewing potential, consultant.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We have a quorum.
That's a quorum.
We have a quorum.
I'd like to call the meeting to order. All right, first item we have on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment? Seeing none, we'll go to the next item, which is approval of the minutes. We approve the CBPAC minutes of July 25th, 2016. If you have any motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion to approve by Jeremy Lecurco, a second by Joanna Pollock. All right, all in favor of approving the CBPAC minutes for July 25th, 2016?
Aye.
All right, any opposed? And actually, I have one abstention. I'm going to abstain because I wasn't at the last meeting. All right, the next item is scope of work for the update of the countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan.
Okay, I will kick this off.
As you know, we sent out an RFP and we selected a consultant to update the Countywide Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. And I'm here to introduce the project manager on this, Megan Mittman from Fair & Pierce. And she will go through a presentation of the scope of work and the idea, the schedule, and the approach that we're proposing to take. And we're here to hear your comments and concerns and suggestions on how to carry out this scope of work. So I'll just turn it over to Megan. Here's the remote.
Red button works? Okay.
And the red
great.
button works.
Good morning. Happy Monday. I'm really excited to be here and to start kicking off this really important project. So the goal of today is just to give you all an overview of what we're in for the about a year and a half that this project is going to be going on for. And then also, of course, to make sure we get any input and questions answered in terms of what the plan is for the plan update. So our goals today are what we're going to go over today, the project goals, the review of the scope of work, and then in particular, I'd also like to get, some early input from you all on the challenges that you think this plan will likely face and any advice or ideas that you have on trying to get out ahead of those. So these were the update goals largely in the RFP as well as in our proposed response. So of course, from the existing conditions perspective, just updating that, figuring out the new baseline of where, when, and why people walk and bike and why they don't walk and bike as well. Forecasting pedestrian and bicycle demand, so taking some counts to know where we are right now and then also what the potential future would be with the different plans and projects in place. And then identifying obstacles and options just to get more walking and bicycling happening. This plan intends to prioritize projects and programs for funding and implementation, and that'll be something that we'll need to be collaborating together to make sure that that's works countywide as well as at the local level. We'll look at assessing the feasibility of bike share coming out to this portion of the county, as well as best practices for complete streets. That will be particularly important if Measure X passes with the new funding that'll be available for that. Calculating the cost of the gaps, we're going to be doing an across barriers connections analysis, which will really highlight what some of those key reasons why we think people are not walking and biking are, and then what it would cost to close those gaps. And then holding ourselves accountable, some performance targeting, as well as the plan includes scope to do a couple of minor update rounds. So the idea is about every 6 years there'd be a major update, but at the 2 and 4 year mark, just some minor kind of data updating so that the plan's still relevant for a while. So to give you a sense of who's on the team, so I'm the project manager, Julie Morgan, who I'm sure you all know. She's my boss and she's the principal in charge of this project. And we have several different Fair & Pierce staff, including engineers and statisticians, GIS staff. We have a demographer who can help us with a lot of the kind of forecasting and baselining. Our sub-consultants, we have Spokemore, who's going to be helping out with quite a bit of the outreach efforts, as well as some of the existing conditions. And then Circle Point is our both public outreach and our environmental lead. So there's 9 different tasks. I'm just going to focus on kind of the big ones, and in particular, the ones where we'll all be coming together to talk about the different milestones and to get your input. So task 1 through 9, what you see in the kind of diamonds across the top is the 6 different times that we expect to be being here with you all to touch base and to get your input, in some cases to give you a sneak peek of what's coming and make sure that we get your advice. So today is that first one, just the kickoff overview of the project. And then we'll be coming back a couple times really in the near term to be talking about existing conditions. We have a pretty lengthy data request that we're going to need your help in making sure that we're asking for the right data and knowing how to best put those requests in. Also to get your advice on the public outreach and make sure that our plan and the stakeholders that we're planning to target are the right ones and kind of effectively timed and scheduled. Next summer will be the first time that we'll be really thinking about kind of pivoting from existing conditions to recommendations. And there's a pretty big milestone effort in this plan that we're calling the white paper. There's the strategic white paper. And that's going to be a time where we have a whole lot of ideas. We've done a lot of listening and learning, and we really need some decisions from you all in terms of this is the direction that we really want to be going for Contra Costa. And so that's something that we're targeting for next summer. And once we have that really clear direction from you all, then we can start writing up the plan, coming up with the project list and the maps and the recommendations. And so coming back then in the fall and in the winter to get your input on the draft and final. And once we have that going into environmental clearance next spring, or spring of 2018. So in terms of stepping through the larger of those tasks, so the first is the baseline conditions. We're going to be doing something called a programs, policies, and practices benchmarking. So this is just a way of getting a sense for each of the jurisdictions on kind of more of a day-to-day design guidelines, policies that are in general plans. If the local jurisdictions have their own ped and bike plans, where are they on those? So we have a kind of good baselining of the non-projects side of it, more the kind of complementary efforts. The GIS data assembly, and that's something that I'm really clear didn't go really smoothly the last time around, and so we're hoping that that's going to be a little less painful. We definitely understand that we need to have a good starting point for a map of what's out there and what's already recommended, where those recommendations are in place. The demand analysis in particular focuses on the pedestrian side, so trying to strategically define pedestrian zones around the county, because then those will come in later on in terms of recommendations and prioritization, and doing a collision analysis to figure out the baseline for that. Interactive web mapping is going to be a major tool that we'll use on both the planning kind of interaction with you all side as well as interaction with the public. And so going back to the GIS data layers, what we're proposing to do here is to get everybody's existing layers that are out there, to put them all into an online platform, and then to use the online platform as a way of doing the quality control to make sure that we got everything right, and can do that in a very transparent, easy to track way that you can put in, this is the wrong link, this is the wrong project location, so that we're not, I think last time it was done more with Post-it notes and markers and things like that, and it was a lot easier to get lost in translation. So that'll be a really important kind of tangible planning tool that we'll be using. At the early stage, just getting the inventory right, and then later on when we have recommendations, to get your feedback on the recommendations. At the same time, we'll be creating a web map platform for the public, right, as a way for them to drop pins to say, this is a location that I really like to walk or bike, or this is a location that I really avoid, as well as to, put in corridors. This is a place that I think we could really use a bicycle facility, or that sidewalks are needed. We've really been liking using this tool as a way to complement collision analysis in particular, because as you all know, it's both underreported and not reported in a lot of cases, because the injury happens after the fact, or there wasn't an injury and there wasn't a report. And so being able to combine the data that's out there from SWITRs and other sources on where collisions have actually happened with the perceived safety from the public is a nice way to get, I think, a more comprehensive sense of the safety concerns. And so the conclusion of that existing conditions effort is going to be a report that'll be called The State of Walking and Bicycling in Contra Costa. And that's going to be defining pedestrian focus areas, defining important regional bicycle facilities, and then identifying the across barriers connections. So the really kind of key missing pieces for those focus areas. The data part of the existing conditions is going to be happening in parallel with the public outreach part of the existing conditions, and that report that talks about the state of walking and biking will both document the data as well as what we're hearing in the first initial rounds of outreach in terms of existing conditions and concerns from the public. So the different outreach tools that we're planning, there's going to be a website, a standalone website for this plan that Circle Point will be putting together, the interactive web map that I already mentioned, and there'll be a link to that on the website. An online survey, just kind of a survey monkey that'll happen at the beginning. A lot of this will be, in addition to the site-specific pieces that we'll be getting from the map, just bigger picture reasons why people walk and bike and don't, as well as kind of strategic vision that residents and visitors to the county have for where they'd like to see walking and biking go in the future. a pretty major change in terms of outreach style, and I'm seeing that for this plan, but really all of the plans I'm working on right now is scrapping the Tuesday night workshop concept, right? So we're not proposing any of the come to this room and go around the stations, but more pop-up events. So that we'll have a booth that will take to 9 different events around the county. We'll need your input on what those best 9 events are going to be. And it's just taking the meeting to where people already are, as opposed to hoping that people will self-select to come. A lot of this overlaps with kind of the theory of the different type of cyclists, and that 60% of cyclists are interested but concerned, and they're the ones that we're really hoping to target if we want to get that many more people out riding, but they're also the ones that are not as likely to come to kind of more of your conventional public meeting. So that's the concept with doing these pop-up outreach events, is to intercept them at the farmer's market, on the trail, at a church, kind of wherever you all would advise us the most important 9 places could be. We're also planning to have a kind of a kit that we'll be using that others could use. So if Bike East Bay or another group wanted to take that kit and do their own pop-up events on top of this, a lot of the ways that we'll be getting feedback will be through our interactive web map, and so we can keep layering and layering if we want to do more of that. And then as we get towards the end of the project and have some draft recommendations that we really want to get feedback on, we'll be doing a webinar town hall, and Circle Point will be leading that. And was it the countywide plan that we did that Circle Point did a telephone town hall for. This is not quite as sophisticated. That was a really major endeavor. This is more kind of a go-to meeting style webinar, but the idea is that a place for people to be able to interact where they are, and kind of technology that people are used to, and it'll be recorded, and the opportunities for people to weigh in if they can't attend the live one will be there. But again, kind of a non-traditional way to get feedback and to reach countywide. In terms of estimating future demand, there's a couple of aspects to this. One is we're going to be doing 20 counts across the county, and this can be layered on top of any other counts that are available just for baselining. This is important for grant applications, just important for performance measurement, for activity levels. And then hopefully pretty exciting, creating a forecasting worksheet, and that should be a pretty quick and easy way for local jurisdictions to forecast. You know, you're going to build 3 miles of a bicycle boulevard. What type of increase in riding would you be expecting? You're going to put in a pedestrian hybrid beacon, you know. And so this will be grounded in what the literature has out there already in terms of the elasticities for putting these investments in, but in kind of a quick and easy way for you all to access that as you're doing grant applications and otherwise, and to create a consistent way of doing that. And we'll be applying that methodology to the priority projects that come out of this effort as well. And as I mentioned, kind of a major pivot point in the plan is this white paper. So getting together and thinking about what our strategic goals are for the plan, but also really making some major decisions in terms of trade-offs. What we're proposing right now, can you hear me? Okay, is to create what we're calling a low-stress backbone bicycle network for the county, right? So this would be a combination of the trails, current trails and new trails, as well as bicycle boulevards, and probably a network of cycle tracks, so the new Class 4 facilities that are being proposed a lot right now, but that are not yet in any significant way across the county. And so that'll be one of the major decisions that we'll need to make when we get to this task. Is that a goal that this plan is going to be endorsing? And if so, what does that map look like? And similarly, identifying and making some trade-off decisions around the pedestrian priority areas. This graphic is just showing what I was mentioning about that 60% interested but concern. And so the concept is that if that's the group we're targeting, they are attracted to a lower stress, what's called level traffic stress 1s and 2s types of facilities. And so if we want to tap into that 60%, those would be the types of facilities that we'd want to be prioritizing, in particular kind of cross-boundary prioritization to access the major destinations in the county. So then we'll write up the plan, and that'll include maps that will show if we decide to go this way. This is the draft of the network. Laundry All right. Well, we're a small group. There we go. So we'll be getting, we have, the scope really tries to go into some detail in terms of rounds of review for kind of when things will come to you all, when they'll be going out to the subregions, when they'll have public comment, so that there's lots of different opportunities, but they're consolidated and clearly kind of laid out in the scope. We'll revise all of that, have the final plan in place, and then do the environmental on that when it's done. So that's big picture, what we're looking at in terms of the different tasks. And I'd like to just answer any questions you all have, get your comments on things that are missing, things that you're hoping to make sure we're accomplishing, and in particular, any challenges that you foresee that we're going to run into. Bill?
Buc-ee's Bay used to produce a pretty good bicycle map. I should know because I worked on the last edition. But they've decided not to do that anymore. Kind of deferring to Google Maps, that sort of thing. Google Maps has big flaws in it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you consider or have been considering producing a map, an interactive map that changes as we begin to put in, say, protected bike lanes, which is a big factor, of course, in getting people to bike. So as those projects are completed, it would be great to be able to go to your map and say, oh, okay, that's done now. Mm-hmm. Easy access for people.
I think that could be one of the outcomes of these 2-year updates, right? So I think a couple of things on that. So one is one of our tasks when we get to the draft plan stage is to do a level of traffic stress analysis, like a before and after. So we can't do it for the entire county. So the reason it comes at that point is we would have our backbone network defined, and we'd have what is the LTS right now for that backbone, and what will it be if we do the projects that we would say we were going to be prioritizing. So that would be one piece in kind of this current one. But for the 2-year out and 4-year out update, the plan is to be, in particular, updating the map for whatever has been built. And I think if we decide to go the low-stress backbone route, then what we'd be updating would be the map of what's currently low-stress now, and then hopefully in 2 years and 4 years out, and more so.
Setting up a system for ongoing changes to the map, then, would you?
There's a specified 2 years out and 4 years out point at which we would be updating the map.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, one other thing I should say about mapping generally is Google Maps is meant to give you the best route given existing conditions. And the plan maps are not meant to be wayfinding necessarily. They're more plans to make improvements. This is what exists now. This is what we hope to build in the future. And the updates, the 2 and 4 year updates of the plan are going to look at what's been built and what jurisdictions have decided not to build in those intervening years. So it's not, the purposes are a little bit different, and certainly the Bike East Bay or East Bay Bike Coalition, back when the maps were being done, those were meant as wayfinding. You know, there was a fair amount of detail, more detail than you'd get on Google Maps, certainly, on slopes and danger and traffic stress, though they didn't call it that at the time.
Yeah, the main problem is that Google Maps just doesn't update. I mean, I don't know when they've updated. Maybe there's some mechanism we should use to, hey, Google, by the way, we have a bike path here, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't know.
Well, and they don't differentiate in how stressful the facility is, right? If it's on your plan, they're going to route onto it as opposed to, and I think that's where having these backbone facilities are important, because it's hopefully that 60% that they're brand new. Come and, you know, be a tourist or, you know, visit or whatever, and they're going to be relying on Google, and they could get in some pretty hairy situations.
Could I just say something about the mics? This is a new system, and for some reason the mics just keep cutting out. So if they cut out when you're talking, there's something wrong, and we're trying to figure out what it is.
Since we one comment, since we're on the topic of maps, in the current bike and ped plan, there's a map for each of the jurisdictions. Unfortunately, there's not one for the unincorporated county, so it's a little difficult sometimes if I'm trying to find, like, say, North Richmond or Bay Point or Alamo. So one comment is as you do this new bike and ped plan, if you could have a map for the unincorporated county as well.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I think in particular on the Across Barriers connection, we'll find that in some cases that's critical because it's sometimes the county pocket that isn't knitting together some of the jurisdiction's plans, right? So it'll be really helpful to be able to make sure anytime that's part of it that we're clear on that and can be more kind of cross-jurisdictionally coordinated.
All right, thank you.
Robert? I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but so yesterday, and I don't, I just knew I was coming to this meeting today, so before I forget, I was on the Moraga Trail, and I'm seeing a lot more electric bikes, basically, or electric scooters. And then I'm with my 91-year-old mom. So there's this, like, combined issue of aging population and also, families that are out with little kids. And I'm like, this trail's not wide enough for the multitude of people type, not just mode. So I don't know if this could address it, this plan, or is there someone trying to address that? Because I think it's going to continue. I mean, I said this years ago, but wheelchairs and electric bikes, electric scooters, and whatever else comes along, autonomous vehicles. No, I don't know what's going to drive on the bike path, but the bike ped path is becoming a bigger user diverse group.
I think we can certainly speak to that in terms of some recommended design guidance for trails and best practices in terms of sizing and when you want to have kind of separated facilities for the different modes, even within a trail context, what that means for crossings when you do that, because that can get complicated in those senses too. I think it's also going to be interesting as we think about electric assist bikes to think about topography and what that could mean in terms of access to other areas in the county. So there's kind of two sides of it. One is how do we plan for it in terms of the shared use facilities, but also how do we plan for it in terms of the reach that you can extend. It's getting cheaper and cheaper to be able to clip on an electric assist kind of motor to your bike and to be able to climb hills that 60% group would have just otherwise not been attracted to.
And I don't know if someone's already got it out there where they're looking at that, or other parts of the country or other parts of the world where that's more standardized. But I think it's a wave that's coming, or here.
There is concern and interest and study being done on how to deal with those different bicycle technologies that are allowed on trails, but how do you make sure that they're allowed in a safe manner? And there's also interest in how you separate pedestrians and bicyclists on a Class 1 facility. And that's something that they're going to be addressing some in the District 4 bike plan, which I hope I'll be able to give you a fact sheet on at the end, towards the end of the meeting. But it's definitely an issue, especially on heavily traveled trails like around the Lafayette Reservoir, or when I lived in Seattle, Green Lake on a nice day was just crazy with bicyclists and pedestrians. So that's something that other countries have done. They've just separated bicyclists from pedestrian because of the speed differential. But Class 1 facilities are shared, and that's an issue that we haven't quite dealt with yet.
Yeah, we're actually starting to talk about this more and more because our trails currently prohibit all motor vehicles. So this is definitely coming. I totally agree. And I have been asked through public processes in other jurisdictions, public input is just that, separate the users, even have a bikeway completely separate from the pedestrian path. And so these design changes, from the East Bay Regional Park District standards, deviations from those standards, are starting to be presented to us. And so we'll definitely be engaged in that conversation. But I had a question about the data itself, the mapping efforts. One thing that would be super helpful for me is after everyone gives all their data to you and you compile it and make these great layers, if it's possible to get those layers back as shapefiles for use in our GIS. Is that something that can be done?
Yes.
Okay. And then one other thing.
You give them to us, we'll give them back
I like
more.
that. Okay.
Isn't that
A little
nice?
quid pro quo. Okay. Lastly, the task, I think it's 4.2, task 4.1. Are these new locations that you're proposing to collect counts at, or are these traditional locations that have been used, like it's say in the last plan?
We just scoped for 20, but did not specify which
Okay.
ones. And so that's feedback that you all can give us on what would be the most helpful. I guess my initial thought would be 20 additional ones, assuming if you have some recently done ones in other places, just to get more coverage. But if there's a reason why doing something 5 years in on a place you counted recently would be helpful in other ways. I think it's important to do different types of facilities and different areas of the county would be the main goals that I would have for it.
Could I add on a bit? I have no idea why it does this. These are daisy chained together, and if the connection goes out, then all the mics down the chain will go out. But none of you seem to be messing with the microphone, so that shouldn't be the case. Anyway, we do have some data that MPC has done in the past at a number of different locations. We have some data from our periodic biennial CMP counts where we, over the last several cycles, have been counting not only vehicles at CMP locations, but also bicycle and pedestrians. There are no CMP intersections in SWAT, so there are no counts in SWAT. And locations are not necessarily the best ones for bicycles, where they're not where you necessarily expect to find many bicyclists and pedestrians. So later on, when we get down to the data, we'll start looking at where we have information and where we need to get information, and we choose the 20 locations.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they're working now. One thing I ought to stress is, and that's when you do your surveys, however many you have or how many different points, I think it's critical that you measure the, I guess we call it LOS, like traffic, on the weekends as well as during the week. We have an issue in Richmond on the Bay Trail where a lot of people come down, ride pretty much only on the weekend, carbon fiber bikes and nice and nice outfits. And the pedestrians are getting blown away. They exceed, supposedly there's a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. It's never marked anywhere, and people ride simply too fast and endanger the pedestrians. We even got to the point where we decided to, Richmond Bike Ped Advisory Committee decided to put up some Burma shave type signs, slow down, you're going too fast, otherwise you're going to fall on something like that. And did that on the weekends. I don't know if it helped, but that's not much of a great solution. But I think maybe you should stress that and also your regional, and the regional trails, of course, that's pretty critical too, that you're going to get far more hikers on the weekend than you do during a week. So keep that in mind.
You talked a bit in the beginning about trying to identify the barriers, why more people aren't out there biking and walking. Can you talk a little bit about how you're going to approach that, given that your target they're not the ones that are currently biking and walking, they're everyone else. And then might you be able to break that down into a sub-regional data set? Because, it could differ quite a bit from different parts of the county.
Yes, I think it's going to be a multi-part piece. So one is definitely when we go out and do our pop-up events and are getting feedback. One of the key questions we're going to be asking is where are places you would like to be walking and biking, but you're not right now, and why, so that we get both the locations as well as the reasons. Looking at the collision data is another way that we'll be able to say, this is a place that potentially people are avoiding because there's some safety concerns there. The interactive web map, that's one of the things that we're going to be asking people to note on the web map. Certainly we'll ask you all for impact. There's also going to be 4 regional kind of 2-hour sessions where we're going to roll out all the data that we have and ask for some input. So we'll be talking about it then. And then finally, this is actually a scope item that Spokemore is going to be leading, and they've coined that term, across barriers connection, and they have a methodology that they're going to be following, but it also looks at things like freeway on and off ramps, just like known barriers to why people wouldn't be walking and biking, and they're going to be identifying those types of land uses and other, physical barriers. So it's basically going to be a layering process of all of that will probably result in some type of a heat map of the most critical barriers that all those different steps have led us towards. But I think certainly we can, that it will be done county level, but what those barriers are and the reasons why they're barriers for people, I'm sure will vary, at the sub-region level, and we'll be able to see that, at that level too.
And the interactive mapping that Megan mentioned is something that people will be able to see, and as people add their places of concern, where they drop pins on the map, everyone will be able to see that, and you'll be able to see the particular locations where people in different parts of the county have issues, where they feel the barriers are. Someone, not the consultant didn't do this, but there was someone who worked creating a website for the City of Concord bike plan. Well, what is it? Bike Ped Safe Routes to Transit Plan, and that was a place where people could see where someone said a barrier was, and then a person could respond to that concern and say, "I agree," or "Well, I think this is an even worse one over here." So I think that will be a way to get a more interactive, ongoing sense of where people's concerns are.
Let me just follow up on that a bit. So I'm hearing, it sounds like you're looking at the folks that are already out there and where do they see the barriers. I guess what I was trying to get at is, if you look at the general population, why aren't there more people out there biking? And is it because they don't feel safe? It's because they have to drop their kids off? Are you trying to get that information out of this process as well in a more general way?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping that that's what the pop-ups process is going to accomplish for us, is that we're going to be going to places where those groups of people are and asking them those questions, as opposed to hoping that they're going to come to a Ped Bike Plan meeting. And then also trying to use social media for that. So kind of, I live in Lafayette. Next door is, the big way that we communicate. And so certainly being able to post on Nextdoor and Llama and the families and that type of social media aspect, I think also will get to that group. And the interactive web map's just going to be a link, right? So anybody can take that and share that. But it's very important, I think, to get that as even more disproportionate of the audience that we're focused on. If that's one of the goals of this plan, is to, get a mode shift out of this.
Yeah, I have a question about the schedule. I'm hoping the schedule is going to work out for us. The pop-ups and the public outreach, is that going to occur in the spring or summertime?
Yes, let's see.
Where we have a lot more outdoor events.
We're assuming spring of 2017, summer of 2017 right now on the calendar. One of my favorite times to do this type of outreach is around Bike to Work Day, right? May is Bike Month.
Oh, yeah.
And so the more that we can piggyback
Wonderful.
on types of effort that's already happening with that, or at least advertise our events with those events, plus the weather obviously supports it a lot better. So,
Terrific.
plan.
Thank you.
Referring to the project management workflow in 1.2, task 1.2, it refers to also reporting to the Regional Transportation Planning Committee task. And at that time, when that occurs, will the project team be accepting comments from the TAC, or is it more informational from the comments that this group or the authority itself provides?
I think it's both, and it kind of depends where we are in the plan. So early on, that's mostly going to be Brad's role, is to kind of take our discussions here and give the same presentation kind of at those groups. But we will have a major meeting that we're hoping will be kind of before or after one of their meetings. That'll be a 2-hour focused sit down in each of the 4 subregions to talk about draft recommendations. And then we have specified in both the draft plan and the final plan a round of revisions. That would be a time for kind of a formal feedback there. Do you have any input on a better flow for that in terms of other planning efforts and how kind of that group's input has been effectively sought?
The question arose just out of the fact that we each represent our subregions here, so ideally we would be bringing those issues to the fore here in this focus setting, but just accounting for the possibility that certain ideas or new data comes to light when the TAC meets. It may not always flow as easily as we hope right here. So I just wanted more to bring it to light for the project team to consider if there's a way to incorporate another jurisdiction on the TAC information that isn't readily available to one member jurisdiction in the TAC. And then I just have a second question in general. Where it refers to what we've talked about, the 9 pop-up events, the 20 data collection locations, is it basically an assumption in the scope of work that as we approach that task, we start looking at the specifics, or are you accepting comments on ideas for those specifics in advance?
I think at any point we would accept that input, but the plan would be, we have the 6 different meetings we'll come to, and it'll be we're getting ready to, our next meeting, the next time I'm here, we're going to be talking about data collection. So, what should be on that list of data collection? Who should that request go to? That'll be a major focus. And so, task when we then meet in the spring and we're getting ready to do the pop-ups. Okay, we have 9 of these. These are, I'll try to always give you something to react to rather than just being completely open-ended on it. So this is what we're thinking for the 9 sites, or maybe here's 15. Help us narrow it down to the 9 or something like that. So that's generally how I would expect it to flow, but I'm always happy to get your input earlier if you know for sure some ideas.
Can we just test something? Can you turn your mic on, Bill, and just test,
Okay. Is this working? No.
It did.
Yeah.
Okay. See, there it works. Okay, sorry. Back to Greg's comment about barriers, not just gaps in trails, but why don't I bike on a regular basis? It seems like a great opportunity in the short online survey to ask a few questions there. Don't own a bike. I have a physical disability. Whatever. Really interesting information could be grabbed from that. And I know it's also important to keep that short so that people actually fill it out. But you could go really big and then increase the scope of this whole project, or maybe just add a couple questions in there. Suggestion. So.
Do you intend to have meetings with what the Bike East Bay calls local working groups? We have a Richmond Bike Ped Advisory Committee, for example. And especially what I'm thinking about is also cities that have a bike ped plan, updated or not, where the local group would have a pretty good handle on where they were and what projects have been developed, what ones they prioritize, that kind of thing? Do you tend to have formal meetings with those sorts of groups?
Right now, the way it's planned is that there's going to be 5 big 2-hour input sessions, one for each of the subregions, and then one for the kind of cross-jurisdictional groups like East Bay and Parks, and a list of about 8 or 10 of those groups for AC Transit, Town Connection. We are not currently scoped to do at the individual level with each of the jurisdictions. So I think that would either need to be accomplished through the pop-up aspect of people coming and talking with us there, or ideally through kind of a liaison role of people representing that voice and that perspective when we do have the sub-regionals. But there's not currently kind of a one-on-one with each of the and I think making sure that the survey and the interactive web map goes out to those groups will be really important. Some of the challenges of the countywide.
Just something that I noticed under task 6.1, where we're talking about overlaying the data from the previous tasks, and you're proposing a regional low-stress network. I guess I'm reading this just to clarify. Is the backbone network intended to be a culmination of all of the local plans kind of put together? Or is this task intended to identify and recommend new facilities throughout the county that could potentially bridge gaps? Because so I guess that would be the first question. Depending on whatever the answer is, I would recommend that the plan identify, instead of specific routes, that maybe there's corridors that could be identified. In other words, I think what I would be concerned about is that the plan could recommend a specific type of improvement without the benefit of having the jurisdiction being a part of that process. And then to the very last paragraph in that, where you're talking about the resulting low-stress network and associated project list will be reviewed during a joint meeting with CCTA, CPAP, and the Bike East Bay. I think regional jurisdictions and our TPCs are vital here. They're integral and very important to this process, especially if part of the low-stress network includes support from the local jurisdictions. I don't think that CCTA, this committee, or Bike East Bay is going to be able to drill down to that kind of outreach level that would probably be needed to get the support to get these projects moving forward. I would also say that, when we're dealing with a regional network, one of the things that always comes to mind is who's going to manage the regional network, who's going to take the leadership role. It's great when you have, East Bay Regional Park District, manage existing facilities. But then if we're proposing a new network, and there's obviously money that is required to be able to maintain that network, those kind of conversations need to be had as well. And in some cases, it's not going to be the regional park district. In some cases, it's going to be the local jurisdiction. And so I would just say that, I think there needs to also be consideration, and that's why the outreach is so vital important during this step, is that when that draft network is completed with the project list, that there needs to be some coordinated local outreach, so that way know what issue they're dealing with and how they can best address that.
I think I got it all, but I probably will forget some of it.
It's all on tape.
Okay. I'm just going to talk loudly. So the first question was, will this be just essentially a roll-up of the local jurisdictions proposed, or will there be new efforts that will be proposed as part of this plan? That's going to be the crux of the white paper and some of the major decisions that we have to make when we get around to task 5. Some cities are already that could be a change from the past plan would be, I think, to be a little bit more regionally, starting rather than just kind of rolling up. In terms of the corridors instead of routes, I think that what we will probably likely find is that some of the projects, if we want to go to a project list type approach, are complete street corridor studies, because we're just not there and we're not doing any operations analysis or anything like that as part of this plan. So I think the goal would be able to say, these are the trails we know, and these are the bike boulevards that we know, these are the cycle tracks that we know, and then here are the obvious gaps. And either, the local jurisdictions have already decided on a plan for those gaps, or we decide as this group that we want to go out there and say something more specific, or we decide that what this plan is going to call for is the corridor study to fill in that gap. The more high level we keep it, the less teeth it has, and potentially the less useful it is. So that's going to be kind of the tension. I don't know. What else? What's your vision on that one?
Well, yeah, it is something. This is so annoying. We did talk about that, and sometimes
Doesn't work.
you're not going to know what direction you can take. I mean, it may be that the jurisdiction hasn't made a decision. There may be a connection that seems obvious, but it's not. It's got a lot of difficulties to it. And I could think of the Monument Boulevard as an example of that. It's got a fair amount of pedestrian activity on it. It has bicyclists. It has a fair number of collisions, but it's not something that the city of Concord has decided is a place where they want to put bicycle lanes or protected bikeway is quite far in the future, if it occurs at all. So, I mean, I think we have to have this balance, as Megan said, between trying to be as specific as you can, but where it's not just so you can have some influence over how over what the future is, but not so direct that you can't get a sponsor to actually do something to carry out that plan.
Well, and just to give you a couple of quick examples of why I think the approach is going to be very important here. We can look at Olympic Corridor as a prime example of one that it was a planning study that researched the way to best connect the Lafayette-Moraga Trail with the Iron Horse Trail. And it didn't go in there presupposing any one specific route. There were a lot of community meetings that were conducted. There was a lot of stakeholder outreach. And there were several design options and alternatives that were actually evaluated. And obviously, that's still a work in progress. But that's a situation where the goal in that study was to bridge the gap. The goal wasn't to take one road and predetermine what facility would go on that particular road. Another one is right down the street, which has yet to really have much movement, but that's the Pleasant Hill BART shortcut path, where the idea is to provide a more direct Class 1 or safer Class 2 facility for bicyclists and pedestrians accessing the Pleasant Hill BART station. There were some design alternatives that were studied, of course, but it didn't get local support. And it kind of fell off from there, because depending on which facility or which design alternative came out, it either did get support or didn't get support or didn't go far enough. So I think here again the goal with even that would be to look at the deficiencies in the network and to maybe launch what could be a potential solution to reach that 8 to 80 category, or as you're putting it here, it's the white paper. It's kind of that who's willing to try out this facility if it's actually built, because I think that'll go a really long way and help provide guidance to the jurisdiction without being some sort of prescriptive document where there hasn't been a lot of thought or outreach. So that's just kind of a additional information.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, if not, I don't know, anything else from? Nice. All right.
Thanks for the input. We'll definitely, when we come back to start talking about the next step, which is the data collection, we'll take your comments and concerns and suggestions into play. We'll still have to decide where those 20 locations are. Thanks.
All right, and I guess next on the agenda here is lunch, so we'll come back here at 12:30.
That would be great. I'm mostly concerned about the schedule. You know, it'd be nice to read. A little hard to read. I'm not. A slow writer.
I don't think so. There are some issues and I have to deal with it. They're not, there's something in there. There's a couple of times.
Okay. Could you send me a notice to proceed before you're almost at the
Yeah.
Okay. I've got kickoff meetings for my team tomorrow, but
I thought I had access. I thought I had it done.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you can get me that, at least we can.
Yeah.
Get a little bit more. That would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good to see you.
You can have a sandwich. No, it just seems like one after another.
Yeah, it kind of ends up that way.
Big trips in the summer.
I remember you were doing some big, long
Bacon, right?
yes, roadway.
We went outside Belly.
Yeah, yeah.
Belly like that?
Yeah.
From where?
Not on bike.
Oh, Billingham's nice.
Billingham's beautiful. It's a great city.
I went to school there.
Lummi Island.
You went to Lummi Island? Why did you go to the? No, Lummi Island is great. I love it. I spent every summer not on Lummi Island, on Gooseberry Point on the other side. I spent my grandparents are from Bellingham.
There's a great cafe downtown. It's supposed to be known for their African peanut soup. That'll tell you what happened. I swear by it. I stopped by there. I can't remember the name of it, but it was highly recommended, and I go there every time.
You can probably
Some people say it's part of the standalone, but it is not part of the standalone.
What was interesting was the last started like got the money out of them.
That's kind of what I was recommending. Not saying a lot of jurisdiction doesn't support specific alignment. So it's like, well, that's not productive either. You want to, in some cases, the cities go right. There's port towns and port and go downtown. And because we're acquainted then situation. So, just being flexible to come up with a solution, I think would be better than having that was my own word. That's something right. Well, that was just it. Is that that's why it's so important. We examined different potential solutions and then came up with these sort of lines. But that was after we did some extensive discussion with the public and get their buy-in and feedback. In some cases, we have these.
What is kind of one that sitting nearby for you is kind of a story.
Not Jackson.
Jackson. That's Jackson. Yeah. A friend of high school friend.
Jacksonville, this is really, it's amazing. It's like it was preserved in memories.
He started, bought a place, started doing work on it. He's got period specific and everything. Renovating that. Very small house.
Actually, I haven't spent that much time.
And then we definitely stopped by Portland. No.
That's what I think about stuff. Still the same, but not the same.
It's exactly the same, but different.
Yeah. Those potato chips are really good.
All right, we'll reconvene the meeting here. Next we'll go to item number 5, update on coordinated call for projects. This is regarding, OBAG call for projects, including PBTF, or the Pedestrian, Bicycle, and Trail Facilities. And I guess some actions, information item only.
Yes, thank you. As you may know, in September, we released a call for projects. It's called the Coordinated Call for Projects because it includes funding for 3 different funding programs. The One Bay Area Grant, the second cycle, which is known as OBAG 2. Then the second cycles of the Measure J Transportation for Livable Communities, or TLC, and Pedestrian, Bicycle, and Trail Facilities, PBTF programs. And applications are due in December, on December 9th. And once we go through and make sure that there are no issues with the project's applications, then we will send them on to the various review committees, one of which is this group, and that's the review for the applications for pedestrian, bicycle, and trail facilities funding. So we have no idea how many applications we're going to get. There'll be some, I'm sure, that will come. There was I can't remember the exact number of the exact amount of funding. It's in your package. It's about $7.6 million available for allocation. There's also going to be about $3.6 million also available for the East Bay Regional Park District. And it'll be available for the 6 different funding years. The money's meant to be spent equally amongst the different regions. So what the schedule is that we're going to get those applications in December, and then in January will be the first time that you'll see them. We expect that, as we did the last time around, that we'll have a set of site visits to where the projects are located, so that you can see what's being proposed in the location in which it's being proposed. And we may need to have a special meeting for that set of site visits. It worked really pretty well last time to go out and look at the various sites. So we're hoping to do something like that again. Now, the authority will make a final decision on the projects in June of next year. So that's about 8 months from now. So we tried this time to give people a fair amount of time to put their applications together and to give
Brad, I'm probably confused about this, but for those of you who don't know, there's also a Contra Costa County Bicycle Advisory Committee that is different from this one, because we get a bunch of projects, some of which is Measure J money, TDA money. No? Am I wrong, Paul?
Measure J is not TDA. TDA is not Measure J.
Okay, so that's all separate from this. All right. They had an early meeting last week about early call for projects, but none of those are part of this program. Okay, that settles it. Never mind.
Any other questions? All right, Greg?
Oh, one quick thing. If Measure X passes, fingers crossed, will that also, some of the money all be available from that also, since it's additive to Measure J?
Now, that is a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, maybe cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, if it does pass, one of the components of Measure J, it has additional funding, and it has the same 2/3 competitive, 1/3 to the park district, and it has a lot of the same features, but it is meant to be a countywide, it's meant to be a competitive process at the RTPC level. So what I'm not sure what that means exactly. It implies that the RTPCs would review the committee, review the applications, and score them. But what the criteria would be, probably the same criteria, same process. But it's not. But yes, we'll burn that bridge when we come to it. No, that's the wrong metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah, Brad, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I heard you say 7.6 million and the agenda says 91 million. Am I getting?
Yeah, the 91 million is all three programs put together. There's about 58, let me get the numbers correct. The OBAG 2 is 56 million, and that's federal funding. And there's a certain amount set aside for different program types. So there's 56 million in total. Safe Routes to School, which will be allocated to the RTPCs, that's about 4 million, a little bit more. There's a component called Federal Aid Secondary, which sounds appropriately bureaucratic, but it goes to the county for rural roads in unincorporated Contra Costa. There's about 4.3 million that goes to the authority for various CMA, Congestion Management Agency activities, one of which is overseeing this process for allocating the funds. And a fair amount of it will be going to about 28 million for local streets and roads maintenance, and it'll go out by formula, which is something there's a revised formula, and I have to send that out to the jurisdictions. That's on my to-do list. The TLC funding is the second biggest chunk. That's 27.8 million. And it's also allocated to the RTPCs. None, unfortunately, for East County, going to East County because they spent all their money on EBART. And then the remaining 7.6 is the PBTF. Sure.
So sorry, excuse me. Now my mic works when I'm clearing my throat. So how does the coordination work with these three funding pots? For instance, if you have a project that may be eligible for Measure J, but we're going through this in Alameda County right now where there's, you have a choice. You could be applying for Measure BB or the local money and then say, but would you be willing to be eligible for the OBAG money as well? And then you check a box. Is that similar process here? And how does that work? So if you do leave it open for OBAG, does that make it less likely you'll get the local, or is it how do you view those projects that are eligible for both pots?
Well, there's a single application for all three programs, and at the front you can check which ones you're applying for. You can apply for competitive OBAG as well as Measure J TLC if you want. Same form. The first set of questions are going to be the same. Who's the contact? How much does it cost? How much do you have committed? How much do you need? what is the project, describe it, and then you'll answer those questions. And if you're going to apply for OBAG and TLC, then you have to fill out both sections of the application. If you just want to apply for TLC, you just fill out the TLC sections. And then we're going to go through 3 separate review processes. And if you apply for 2 programs, you'll go through 2 reviews. If you apply for 3, then you'll go through 3 reviews. And then at the end, let's say your project gets selected both for OBAG and TLC, then we have to figure out, would it be easier to have you go through the federal process, which is much more onerous, or some other project that was selected for OBAG funding, and maybe give them TLC funding. And then we have to also maintain the regional shares, so it's going to be complicated.
Brad, with applications due in December, is there any reason to think that the authority will not forward those applications for the TLC to the RTPCs in January for review?
I'm hoping that we send it at the end of December.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking that is because I think that will, typically we meet every quarter, is it?
This group?
Yes.
No, every other month.
Every other month, okay. Because I'm wondering if it would be advantageous for this group if we haven't scheduled February to meet then, because it seems to me kind of like, I think what everyone was, I mean, what you were indicating, it would be beneficial, I think, to this group to know if a project has been identified through TLC that could potentially be a good funding pot for TLC and recommended as one of the initial projects. It may be something that we look, it doesn't mean that it's going to score any less from this group, but if the idea is to score more projects and to have more projects built, I mean, I would hate to see the same project competing for both pots. If it's clearly being funded through TLC, I would hate to see us not score somebody else because there wasn't enough funding available.
Well, what we're going to get are 3 sets of, well, 6 sets if you count, well, 5 sets if you count the RTVC's recommendations for TLC separately. But we're going to get these prioritized lists, and it may be that a project scores high enough on 2 lists to be funded through 2 different programs. And then we have to decide, should the project get funded with this funding source or this funding source?
Well, and that's the question. Who's deciding? Is it each, like, is the RTPC in charge of recommending their list to CCTA, and this group is in charge of reviewing the PBTF list to CCTA? But if there's the same project on both lists, how do we, I just remember last time, the first iteration of this grant program, we were, it was oversubscribed. There were more projects than what we had money to actually fund. And I would hate to see some of the lower scoring projects not get funded at all if it could potentially receive funding through another funding source.
Well, that's what we're going to get are these prioritized lists, and at a certain point on those lists, there's going to be a cutoff because you've run out of money to allocate the program. So if you've got a project, say, on the OBAG list and on the TLC list, well, let's say you decide, well, let's fund it with OBAG. That means you can go down the TLC list and pick the next project and fund that one. And the same with the PBTF. If you've got 2 projects, one that's funded through OBAG and one through PBTF, then we can go down the PBTF list. Or maybe you stick with the PBTF because the project's fairly small and you don't want them to, we want to keep the number of federal projects that have to go through Caltrans local assistance low, because the more projects that go through there, the slower it all is. We do not, we're going to have 20 just from the local streets allocations, and we want as few added to that list as possible. Because as anyone who's gone through it, it's not the most fun process we've ever gone through. Does that answer your question?
I have a question. In February, if that's the timing of the review, I think last time we went out and actually visited each of the projects, and I think East Bay Regional Park, and I think I said this at the last meeting because it's sounding redundant to me. It's kind of wet time of year, hopefully, but that's what it is. We're going to spend a day, you think, seeing all the projects?
Yes, that was the idea. That's what we did last time, and it seemed to work.
I'd be happy to secure a vehicle too if that works.
The Park District was very helpful in that last time.
It's autonomous, so no, I'm just kidding.
All right, any other questions? Actually, I have one question. I guess this is going to be being my first time when I go through the PBTF process. Like, can you give a description of the schedule or timeline of this committee here in terms of reviewing the projects and when we're going to go on this field trip?
Okay, let's see. There's a schedule in your packet. It's on page 510, and we have a couple of dates. September 23rd is when it was released. There was a workshop. It was at the TCC meeting last Thursday. Oh, okay. Sorry. Let's see if I can get this a little closer to my mouth. There we go. Okay, that's better. Applications due in December. We've got a 3-month period for review of the projects. So in January, I'm expecting to have a list of all the projects that applied and focus for this group on those that applied for PBTF funding. And then schedule the site visits sometime February, maybe early March. And then in March, at the March meeting, have your recommendations put together. In April, that's when we'll put together all the scores, send them out to the applicants, because we're going to give them, this applies to the OBAG funds, but gives them a chance to respond to the scoring and see it. They'll, I'm sure, suggest some corrections to the scores and provide additional information they think needs to be considered. And then finally, in May, in April, we'll put together the funding program, shift projects around to make the best use of the funds, try to fund as many projects as possible. And then review that list in May with the TCC, in June with the Planning Committee, and then finally with the authority in June as well. The Measure J money could be available as early as July, because we could for those projects that are programmed in earlier years of the PBTF and TLC funding, we'll be able to do that allocation and programming the funds appropriation in July. We don't want to get too far ahead because the projects have tended to be delayed on average. I think it's 1.5 years. The last time I checked, the average delay was 1.5 years for the TLC and PBDF funded projects. So we want to make sure the projects are ready to go when we program the funding. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually, one additional question. When we review these projects, is that something we do here or something just we do in our back in our office and then bring our results here? How does that process work?
Yeah, it's the former, that we send out the applications to everyone and that you would review. Depending on the number, and it may be that if we get so many applications that we might break us into two groups and have one group review one set and another group do another set. But last time, everyone reviewed every project, and it wasn't too onerous.
Including our own?
Now you don't get to review your own project.
I don't remember. I just wouldn't think so, but I think I've worked in places where you did. Or
I guess it's that we don't trust anyone to be that honest. Or you just know your own project so much better than everyone else's.
Well, being from WICTAC, it's anything in West County is considered ours. So I would say, like, if someone's from Concord, is that right? Orinda. Okay, or Lafayette. They wouldn't review Orinda or Lafayette, but they might have a certain, not bias, but favored understanding of projects that are in, is that SWAT? So, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I know that I wouldn't review anything in West County, but Bill over here, well, you're West County.
Yeah,
But he could review a project in
That's the
Pinole
problem
or
is-
Hercules.
And East Bay Bike would be anyone, right? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out who gets to review what, how many applications.
Yeah, and cities versus the county. I mean, cities versus.
Well, normally it's just the jurisdiction that you work for. You don't, because generally you have some role. Often you have some role in putting together the application. And since you're a proponent of the project, then any proponent of a project doesn't get to review it. So I think the last time the WICTAC representative did review projects, as long as you weren't the proponent of that project.
So I reviewed the El Cerrito and the Richmonds and the San Pablo's projects?
I think so.
Oh,
I can check.
you can. I don't remember.
I will.
Probably did as part of this group. I don't think I scored it. But I mean, it's you wrote it. I didn't write it, but it would it would make sense from a input perspective. If the committee has questions, if there's a representative that has answers to those questions, you want to have answers to people, even though you're not deliberating on scoring.
Well, I remember each of the cities, when we went to visit their sites, I think they were mainly city applications, they had city staff there. So I wasn't representing them, but I guess I did score them. I don't remember.
I don't think that, just to clarify on the record, I don't think there's anyone here. I mean, like, I'm in Walnut Creek, but I'm not representing Walnut Creek. I'm representing TransPAC. So I think there's not, outside of the county, there's not just a singular jurisdiction that's representing themselves here. So I don't recall that was an issue last time. We wouldn't necessarily score the projects that were within our jurisdiction, but there would be nothing to keep me from evaluating a project in Pleasant Hill or Concord.
I think that's right, and I think if you're a staff person from a jurisdiction, you do not review and score that jurisdiction's projects. And if you're a citizen representative, then of either a region or a different agency, you can review any of them, even though you happen to live in that jurisdiction. I think that was the ground rules we had last time.
So on the subject of ground rules, then, if you're on this committee and you do happen to have a project that, I think I would be the unique agency on this committee that may be applying for competitive portions of this money. And so what is that? Questions are able to be answered? What are the ground rules? Or do we have something in writing I could make sure I don't break them?
We don't have anything in writing other than our general policy of that reviewers do not review and score projects from their agency. But if we were to visit a project that the Park District had, like the one that goes down to the Pinole Park overcrossing, let's say you apply for that again, then you might answer questions when we go on the site visit at that location, but you wouldn't be able to score that project.
And as I recall, it was more of a consensus decision with the committee. I don't think we specifically voted as far as the project list. After we all scored it, we all had a consensus as far as which ones were going to be funded.
Well, there was a score. Everyone scored
Yes.
it, and I compiled the scores, and then we looked at the list. I don't think we made any changes.
I remember something differently. I do remember when we went out, we didn't review all of I don't remember making site visits to all of the sites. I remember making site visits to some of them that were very closely scored together, that were on the cusp of either getting recommended funding or not. I could be wrong. Maybe we went to hit everyone, but I remember we scored. There were some that, in particular, I can remember Moraga was one that was above the line, and then afterwards it fell below the line, and there was just some unique situations that it certainly became beneficial to go out and see the site. Maybe
Well, perhaps what I can do is bring this back to the committee next time, talk about the process, the dates, who gets to vote, which ones we visit. Do we do the scoring, an initial scoring, then site visits, then final scoring, which is your memory, and I'll confirm that which process we used the last time, and then we can agree on the ground rules at our next meeting.
Yeah, that would make sense. And I think, getting that historical, none of us obviously in this room are going to remember exactly right, but I do remember, Paul, that it was consensus process, because I remember we were looking at everything up on the board and what rose above and what was in the gray area and what really dropped out. And it was, no one left with hard feelings.
Also, I remember now, I actually was the driver of the van on the last one because I wasn't in this.
Yes.
Anyway.
Jim Townsend was
yeah. So, yeah, it was. But now I forgot what I was going to say. Come back to me, because I had something, I actually meant something that I was going to say, but I forgot. I was joking. The criteria, too. I'm sitting here thinking, well, what makes me an expert on what's best for Pleasant Hill when I'm reviewing the project, right? So there is a criteria, right, a scoring specific set of...
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
The committee has reviewed the criteria that we're going to use and applied weighting to each of them.
Great, okay. That's...
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, we'll move on to the next item here. Item number 6, MTC's Active Transportation Working Group.
Yeah, I included their last meeting agenda. I'm trying to think of some of the things to bring up. One is the Caltrans bike map. There is something online, and I was hoping it would get printed out so I could hand. Well, that's different. That's the state bike plan. There's a handout. This one. That's the California state bike and ped plan, which is running through February 2017. If you want to read about it, there's a website listed on the back, and you can make comments and suggestions on the plan. Caltrans is District 4 is also doing a bicycle plan. I'm on the technical advisory committee for it. There was the first meeting last Friday, and there's a fact sheet on it, which I just was emailed, and I guess Diane didn't get the email yet. Anyway, if it's not here for me to hand out to you, I'll send it out to you later. That process is going to go for about a year and a half as well. They're going to focus mostly on Caltrans facilities, all the highways, and how to make those facilities safer for bicyclists and pedestrians, and how to connect them to existing facilities that are off the state highway system. Let's see, City of Palo Alto, they're looking at expanding their bike share plan, their bike share program using social bikes, which I'm not exactly sure everything that goes into a social bike, but it's not quite the same as the other bike share programs. Some of the other stuff, you know about the sales tax measure, the OBAG grant update. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, let me know, and I'll try to answer them.
In your discussions about bike share, have you talked about the issue of bike share relative to poor communities? There's this problem of bike share that has to be linked to credit cards, which some people don't have, and the cost of it, et cetera, et cetera. Has that issue come up?
Oh, it's definitely come up. I know that Motivate, who is the company that's running the bike share in San Francisco and the expansion bike share in East Bay, they are considering ways of addressing that. There's no formal proposal, I don't think, yet, but they are looking into it.
I'm doddering here. Didn't Ford take over Motivate or something and make it all free, or what happened? There was a picture of everyone standing with the Ford bike, Mayor Lee and all that. What was that?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question.
Does anyone remember?
I've read something
I
about
thought
it, but I
that
can't
Ford
remember it.
decided to go into the bike share business and make it all free, Ford as in Ford Motors, and then expand. I don't even know how the relationship worked, but it was to their benefit because it was pure advertising. The bikes say Ford all over them. And it was in the MTC online newsletter. And then, because I read too much, I don't remember what happened next.
That's exactly what happened, yeah.
So they're increasing from 700 to 7,000 bikes at no cost to taxpayers.
That's a big change.
Did the what is the Active Transportation Group?
ATG.
ATG?
WG.
WG, working group. No one discussed it there? I don't go to those meetings.
No.
I just noticed, I looked at the website too, it just got passed, I guess, early September, and this meeting was, mid-September, so I don't know. I mean, the timeline, just, I guess that Ford thing happened right before this meeting took place, so maybe the next meeting.
Well, what's his name was in the picture? What's the head of MTC?
Heminger.
Heminger? Yeah. He was in that picture, so.
Okay.
We're almost done here, so hopefully in a minute here. Yeah, we'll go to item 7. Any other business / information sharing? Any new news?
The only thing I'd say is I attended the NACTO conference in Seattle, and there are a number of issues that were brought up. I did, and here are the handouts. You can pass them around. This is about the District 4 bike plan, which they're going to have a website, and I think they're going to have an interactive online comment map. So look for that. It's not ready yet, but it should be soon. Anyway, I went to NACTO. Went on a bike ride with Polly Trachtenberg, from head of New York City's transportation department. There were a lot of interesting things. They have a new global street design guide, and I was going to ask if there's interest in the county. Do you think about some discussion of the NACTO guidelines for streets, since Caltrans has endorsed those guidelines? There might be some sort of educational outreach to jurisdiction staff to understand what those guidelines are and what the Caltrans endorsement means. That's the feedback I'm asking for.
I'm just in shock still that Caltrans is preparing a bike plan, but it's very interesting. I wouldn't mind having more information about it, but I know we have a lot to talk about. So.
I can bring updates on what the process is and where it's at each meeting.
Did they hire a consultant to do it?
Yeah, Alta. Alta's also doing the statewide bike ped plan as well. And in fact, there was a stakeholders meeting this morning. It conflicted with this meeting.
Okay. Last item, just the next meeting date and agenda. The next meeting is going to be on, I guess, Monday, January 23rd, 2017. Other than that, I think we're adjourned. All right. Thank you, everyone.